Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again. We're really excited about today's podcast. We're going to talk about really what everybody's going to be talking about in the next month, the World Cup.
That's right.
Woo! How you feeling about it, Romero?
Man, I can't wait. It's really excited. Like every 4 years, it's always the same type of excitement that starts building up.
Yes, and I think for us as Latin Americans, one of the reasons that we want to explain this excitement to our listeners is because we want to give you a perspective into why Latin Americans, Mexicans, Colombians, Argentinians, Brazilians, we love soccer so much. And we know right now, as somebody who lives in the United States, I think some people are getting that feeling of, oh, this is how it feels when your country is not in the World Cup. And because the U.S. is not in the World Cup.
Yeah, for the first time, I think some Americans may start to feel that. I think there's definitely a unique connection that people that are not from America have to the World Cup. I think for us coming from Latino America, it's very unique, and we can probably have a lot in common. You being from Colombia, me from Mexico.
Yeah.
But I found that even people from Europe, you would share those that same connection to their teams. So it really is something that we feel that Americans have been to some extent missing out on for so long. Although the number of hardcore followers that have gradually followed the team over time has increased, and so you're right that this for the first time, so many of them might actually feel what it's like.
Yes, and I think the perspective, and I think that U.S. fans may not understand, and one of the reasons that people don't understand the type of negative reaction that people have with the U.S. team is because in some ways soccer is the only thing that the U.S. is not good at. And as someone who comes from Latin America, from America's playground basically for most of your life, you realize that, that's the only place that you are better than that country. And it feels good, right? And the Americans also have a lot of other things going on. They have football, they have baseball, hockey, all these things. People are not worrying so much about the economy. In places like Colombia, soccer is everything because it provides that national unity, and it helps you process your environment. So even if I'm poor, even if I'm struggling, even if I'm doing well, I want to sort of celebrate and feel like my country is better than that other country in soccer, and that they really provide a face for a country that is often not out there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's definitely a point that I've heard before expressed by people from Mexico and even Central America, that it feels like a small win. Like finally we get to be better than they are at something, however small and insignificant that may seem from somebody else's perspective. It is significant to the people. So I think it's I'm glad that we're talking about this, and I think today we're gonna try to focus a little bit on your experience being a Colombian American and growing up in Colombia till you were 12 years old, and then coming to the U.S. at that age, correct?
Yeah, correct.
And then from then on, you lived on the East Coast, but you were still, like most Colombians that come to the U.S., still passionate about your team and still follow it. So your story regarding the World Cup, it's such a big event every 4 years. We were talking about this earlier, that we all have memories about every single World Cup. We know what the matches were, especially like for our team, like me for Mexico, you for Colombia. If I say World Cup 94, you know if they made it or not, you know which matches they won, and you know which matches they lost.
And it's amazing because you tie so much of your life and your experiences around that time is tied to the timing of the World Cup.
Yeah.
In some ways, you remember World Cups where, the first World Cup that I remember seeing was the 1990 World Cup. And I was only 8 years old, and like among the most vivid memories that I have about growing up are memories about how the soccer team did that year. And in particular, that year Colombia played against Germany, which back then, as they are now, they are one of the best teams in Colombia, in the world.
Yeah, they've been consistently one of the best teams ever, really.
Yeah, but it so happened that this was the start of when Colombian soccer was great. And it was great because there was money in the sport. So a lot of the Colombian players actually stayed in Colombia and played together. And, and probably the readers who are familiar with what's going on in Colombia at that time,
Yeah.
yes, it had to do with money from drugs and cartels. And that's because soccer provides a very easy way to laundry a whole bunch of cash.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that sadly did contribute to how good soccer was at that time.
So really, your story, for those that are listening that may be consumers of ESPN, they would be familiar with ESPN's 30 for 30 about Pablo Escobar, about that whole incident. So, but again, like, that's a story being told by ESPN, being told from the point of view of a reporter that followed the events and then maybe interviewed some players and some people. But this is your story from your perspective about somebody from Colombia that was growing up through that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm so glad you brought that documentary. And actually, that documentary was done by a Brown alum. And I just remember that when I saw it, even as a Colombian growing up, and this is around the World Cup in '94. So this is an important year for me because a lot of stuff is going on in terms of my personal life, but also what's going on with Colombian soccer. But I'm so glad that you brought up that documentary, the two Escobars, because the documentary talks about, yes, the now famous Pablo Escobar, but then there was Andres Escobar, who was the captain of the Colombian national team. He was well loved, respected. He was a gentleman on and off the field. So that's why people loved him so much, and it so happened that he has a name similar to Pablo. But the reality is that it was the patronage of Pablo Escobar who helped poor kids from Colombia be able to have a way to get out of their poverty through soccer. So that's why you have René Guita, you have Andres Escobar, you got Leonel Alvarez. You have so many Colombians who, because of soccer and because of the help and investment of someone like Pablo, who really loved the sport, they now have the opportunity to represent our country and get out of poverty, because that's one of the only ways that you can go up the socioeconomic ladder in a Latin American country.
Yeah, and so that topic in itself is really interesting, because you throughout history you end up with characters such as Pablo Escobar that you can look and criticize all of the bad things that they did, but for a very small segment of the population, these guys actually managed to do something for them that their own politicians never did.
They provided services, food, and loans.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to get into the justification, and we're not going to try to get into a conversation where we try to justify that where we try to say, well, look, the bad offset the good or anything like that. We're just kind of stating the facts,
providing perspective, right?
Providing perspective of, like, for some people, this was the reality that their professional careers in soccer were helped as a result of the contributions that a lot of the drug money was making around that time, and it even helped the team to a certain extent too, right?
It did. I mean, it just, the attention, the skills, having all you good players playing in the national league. That's one of the reasons Spain recently won. One of the reasons. So if you notice, all of the teams who have won the World Cups are teams who have very competitive leagues,
right?
And that's how they make sure that their own young talent is developed, and in some ways it's being developed with the help of a lot of South American players and African players as well. So it does impact. But relating it back to Colombia, I think '94 was such a special World Cup for Colombia, because it was sort of represented this climax of a lot of good things despite all the bad things were taking place. So one of those was the fact that we beat Argentina 5-0. So even before the World Cup started, having beat one of the best soccer teams in your continent, which is probably one of the hardest continents to play soccer in, and then to beat them by 5-0, you don't understand the type of lift that gives to a soccer fan from that particular country.
What was the atmosphere like watching the game? Like, who were you watching that game with? Do you remember?
Oh, those were the games that I was watching. Well, I was here in the U.S. already, and I remember I was watching it with my grandfather,
Uh-huh.
and he was a huge fan, and he was such a fan that he recorded the 1986 World Cup in Mexico,
Uh-huh.
and I remember. I don't remember if it was before or after the '94 World Cup, but I was like, oh my God, he has tapes from these games that I've heard about
Mm-hmm.
and I hear about it with the commentators, but I've never seen them. And so once I had the opportunity to see the game where Maradona played against England
Okay, in the final.
in the final and had la mano de Dios. But in the thing is that in Colombia is not. It was happening in other places like Chile, Argentina, all those things. But that was sort of the style of soccer in South America was like win by all means necessary. Just make sure you win because you know your country depends on it.
Right, and so just like in any other game, especially with the World Cup, there always comes the devastation of losing. So equal with the excitement of following this game, I think one of the reasons why each 4 years stays with you equally as well is because of those losses and how devastating they could be. Like, tell me as because I know from like Mexicans' point of view, from growing up with families, I know how devastated some people would get, including myself. How do Colombians how would they handle the loss of not only a match but the elimination of the team from the World Cup?
You know what? It's the reality is that being in the World Cup is a prize unto itself.
Mm.
And I think it's just, you realize that when you come in, the expectation is that you're going against these giants of soccer. So just getting there, that's amazing. And then you have a couple of good games and you can advance to the next stage, fantastic. If you don't, well, at least we made it to the World Cup. We're developing our young players. We're getting experience. So it's a very, very similar experience as to what happens with the NCAA basketball tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So the NCAA tournament is like a World Cup that happens every year. And soccer happens every 4 years. So that's why there's a build-up of this energy that was happening in the country. And in some ways, how well your soccer team is doing in the world is representative of how well your country is doing in the world, because that means that you have the ability to invest in your players, your community, your economy must be growing. That's a good sign. And so in some respects, soccer can be a good sign that the economy is doing good. Brazil, Argentina, Chile, all those things. And then when the economy turns on you and it's not well, at least we've built a system where our soccer team can provide that emotional lift while we're dealing with some bad economies, corruption, and other issues. So I think that's one of the reasons that in Latin America, soccer becomes a proxy for politics and where you are within the continent.
You're talking about the link that occurs between the fans of the sport and how they relate the success of the team to some inherent characteristics about themselves, yes. Right? Like some projection, and so we were talking about defeat, and you actually mentioned something interesting that I want to come back to, but for defeat, I know that with Mexico is very similar in that when the Mexican team loses, like you feel it on a personal level. You feel like you yourself failed as well.
It's a loss for you.
Yeah, and
they're your warriors.
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
Your guerreros.
So that connection to the team, it's tied because that's tied into national identity,
national pride.
Yeah, national pride, and it goes both ways. When they're doing amazing, and like you said, when they get to the World Cup itself, that's a reward in itself. Although maybe it's even more significant for you because, like, look, honestly speaking, Mexico has a really easy trip to the World Cup. They have an easy road. They just beat the U.S. and maybe
among the
Costa
easiest.
Rica, depending on whether Honduras or Costa Rica are doing well. But the hardest opponent for Mexico is the U.S. So Mexico always gets a free trip to the World Cup. But with you guys have to battle powerhouses, Brazil, Argentina, and at any given time, Peru, Uruguay, or Paraguay
Ecuador.
can be on it as well. And so you guys may not make it every single World Cup. But yeah, that's always, that's one of the things about the World Cup that's always fascinated me, is how people, especially at least from Latin American countries, to what I understand, maybe it's similar for Europeans as well, but how they relate the success of the team and how they make it really personal, to the point where you feel like a success if the team's winning, but you feel like a loser, like you lost something if the team is losing.
Well, yeah, and I think getting to the original question about how you process loss, I think that you realize that if you want to be a champion, you got to positively turn that loss into a lesson, and you have a decision. Are you gonna let it keep you down, or you're gonna try to do something to be better so you can be better?
I mean, that sounds like a great way to handle loss. Are you speaking from your own experience, or is that how Colombians in general interpret the loss?
No, I think it's I think from my experience, and also Colombians in general. So from my experience, soccer was part of my life at a very young age. I didn't play in a club because I was too poor, so we played on the streets. Oftentimes, if you didn't have money to buy a ball, you bought a bunch of socks together. You got your mom's nylons, and you just stuff that thing with socks. You turn it around, and it turns into a pretty decent soccer ball. Yes, until it turns oval. Or then you get one of those old plastic soccer balls that they sell in the dollar stores here, that once you get punctured, it deflates. So like, oh man. So hey, first of all, try not to puncture it, because then that's the only ball that we have. And B, if they puncture, then we need to put some tape or on it, or then start wrapping it with socks so we can still use it.
Did you ever have experiences? Because I grew up in very with similar experiences. And did you ever have cases where one kid would have a ball, but then he wouldn't want to take it out to play?
Yes,
he would reserve it for like the special
occasions. It was a kid who had probably the more money on the block, and always had was dressed nice, who had the cool toys and things like that. And part of it was like you had to be nice to him because you wanted to be out and get the ball. So it was kind of like you got to hustle. So hey guys, don't make fun of him. Let's bring him on so he can bring his ball so we can have a good soccer game. Yeah. So it's funny, and then it's a social. So even then, it's a social. A way that we as kids socialize. You understand who are the kids who have it, who's good, who you can connect with. Can you like talk about how can we use this connection to gain the benefit of having a good soccer ball to play. Yeah. But then when I come into the U.S., playing in high school was really a formative time for me around soccer, because I started playing for my high school team. I started playing for a Portuguese team, two teams actually, Bristol Sports and Lusitania. And at that point, that was my connection with the immigrant experience from the Portuguese. So the Portuguese had created these clubs where they were able to do tournaments against the clubs, and they had a taza and a super taza, a cup or super cup, and they had the teams where you played as a young person, and then there were the juniors and the seniors, and they had their own league. So that's how they built community among themselves, but also integrated a number of other immigrant kids, like Colombian kids, who we tended to be very good at soccer. Even if we weren't that good physically, we kind of had an understanding of the game that they did not have, and that they wanted to help us with.
So what do you think that is one of the key reasons why that sort of connection doesn't really develop for the casual, or for the American fan? So I think we have to like distinguish them first, right? Like first you have to talk about the Americans have a lot of sports to choose from. So there's a lot of them that are just not going to be interested in soccer at all. And maybe like, we can talk about them as well. But I think even for the fan that follows the US, do you think that connection is at the same level as it would be for kids from other countries?
It's not, and in some ways is representative of the American experience, right? So Americans have choices, but people in other parts of the world don't. And so, which is a good and a bad thing as it relates to soccer. I mean, here, part of the reason there's not that attachment is like, oh, I don't have to get my identity is not so much invested in my national soccer team. I have my professional football team or my professional hockey team or basketball, baseball. So you have a lot of ways to spread your emotional capital. But in Latin America, soccer is the only thing you have. And yeah, other sports are good. Like Colombian cycling is another sport where we have done a lot of good work. Weightlifting, but around those, soccer is king. So much of all your attention is focused. So that's one of the things I remember in Colombia. All the country shuts down. Crime stops. People are just watching or listening to the game on the radio and TV. And so that's how I remember experiencing soccer. It was that love, that amazing. And then even though everybody was in their homes, you can hear when people scored, when we scored, everybody just screaming, dancing, doing all these things. And obviously when we lost, it's like, oh, that was tough. But it sucks that we didn't win. At least we got there. It's shitty that we have to lose, that we lost. It's shitty that we're dealing with shitty things politically, economically, and things like that. But you know what? There's hope for tomorrow. So I think that's the other thing soccer provides. It's hope. And if you realize that, if you have that hope and if you're willing to invest your time and ability to develop yourself as a soccer player, but then as a country to develop your soccer team, that just shows that, you know what, that's how you get ahead and how you get to a better place.
The way that you portray it makes it sound like it's a win-win. It's a great feeling to go to the World Cup, and if you lose, there's like a great learning experience from it.
Yeah.
I think from my experience, it seemed a lot messier because, again, Mexico makes it to just about every single World Cup because the path there is very simple. But those losses were devastating, and maybe that's because Mexicans had set their expectations like way too.
You think the marketing plays an impact on that?
I would
love to hear your thoughts about that.
We were talking about this earlier, how maybe because there is an interest in marketers in the PR campaigns to try to portray Mexico as a level team that can beat any team out there. And while I do think that the players themselves, their individual talent is there, the team itself will not be able to consistently beat good teams, great teams like England, Germany, Brazil, Argentina. And so, yeah, Mexico has the talent, but let's just look at the history and the statistics. The statistics will tell you that Mexico still has a long way to go. But man, those losses for Mexico, and I can even go back because I can tell you which team Mexico lost to in every single World Cup. And one of the reasons, I think one of the ones that bothered me the most was the 2002 loss against the U.S. And not only was it devastating because you have to wait another 4 years for the next competition, and that's going through your mind. Like, this is what I would do. So, let's say the World Cup in 2002, I was 20 years old, and then I would think like you had waited so long to watch your team compete at the top, the top level with the top tier teams,
yes,
just to see them lose, and then in my head I'm already doing the math. I'm like, man, by the time they make it to the next World Cup, I'm gonna be 24. And you know what? When you're young,
4 years is a long time.
Yes, and you always think like there's part of you that's thinking like, man, in 4 years, like I'm gonna be old. Like I'm not gonna.
Well, that's precisely why, because at that time you're experiencing so many new things, right? And it's just like time just feels like it's going by so.
But do you? Maybe this is just my experience, but and by the way, this is like. In completely wrong experience. Wrong way to look at things. But I always saw it that today I'm 20. In 4 years old. In 4 years I'm gonna be 24. Like getting old sucks. Like nobody wants to be old. It's boring, and I'm not even gonna care anymore. Cause like man, by the time I'm 24, I'm just gonna have given up on like so many things.
Yeah.
And then when I was 24, I was like, man, 24 is like
awesome.
You're awesome, dude. But then I would do the same logic.
Living
like,
your best life at 24.
And then I would think, man, by the next World Cup, I'm gonna be 28. man, that's really old.
Am I going to be married? Am I going to have kids?
Exactly.
Am I going to be in grad school?
And you start getting into these calculations, and that's why the losses would seem so devastating. Not only because sometimes the losses, sometimes it'd be really close. Sometimes you would lose in penalties, and you start doing like, man, what if, what if he would have done this? What if he would have done that? But the one that hurt the most was the loss in 2002 against the U.S. Not because, look, I'm a diehard U.S. hater just because that's just how I grew up. Like Mexicans, it's really hard for Mexicans, because I grew up in Mexico too. Yeah. It's really hard for Mexicans to root for the U.S. I understand if people want to root for them, people that were born in the U.S., if they want to root for the U.S., if they're Mexican American, then hey man, all for it. That's your choice. But if you grew up in Mexico like I did, I grew up with that team. Yeah, and it's really hard for me to change my allegiance now that I'm in the U.S.
It's a proxy for how Colombian, how Latino, how Mexican you are. Like, who do you root for, right? And I think as Latinos who grew up in Latin America, like the Colombian national team, and I will be Colombian because I was born there. I love this country. I love the U.S. But that's the thing. I'm both things, right? And en vez de ser, somos doblemente americanos. Yeah. Porque nacimos en Latinoamérica. We moved to the U.S., so we have lived both experiences. So I root for the U.S.
I root for them when they're not playing Mexico.
When they're playing Mexico,
but this is an interesting thing, though. I was never always like this. That when I was younger, when I was in high school, I absolutely hated the U.S. team, especially after we lost to them.
And this is a perfect tied back to the conversation we were having about '94, because in '94 is when Colombia, even though it was projected to be the World Cup champion by someone like Pelé and so many other players, like we had an amazing team, but we get there and then the team sucks. Like you can just tell that they're not playing well. They tied against teams they should have beat easily. Yeah. And then it's like, oh my God, okay, first game, that's fine, whatever. Let's see how they do the second game. Oh man, the second game, you're either good or you do bad. Hopefully you're tied, but if you win, you set yourself up to get out of the group. But then if you do bad on the second game, then you only have the last game, and depending on how your other teams did, who won, who lost, it might be your only chance. And then Colombia lost in '94 against the U.S., and we lost against an own goal.
Right, from Escobar.
And the thing is that he was the best defender. He was the captain.
He was the team captain, right?
So he just made a stupid mistake. And then, if people who watch the 30-for-30 special that we've been talking about, they will understand why. As a Colombian, I didn't know that. As a Colombian now in the United States, I didn't know that until I watched that documentary. And the thing was, it was so it was not only having your best team lose, but losing against the U.S., right? Yeah. Somebody who the rest of the world doesn't see as a soccer power.
Well, not only that, like the reason why losing to the U.S. hurt so much in 2002 was because the next day it didn't even make front page news. Yeah. And you're losing to a country where the people don't seem to even care, where soccer is
not as many people, and I know a lot of people do.
Sorry, I don't want to the small minority of like Uncle Sam's Army and those guys that like follow the team diehard. Like, man, because that's great, because those guys appreciated the win.
You respect that.
Yeah, you respect that because the passion, right? But just the U.S. is not like a Mexico or Colombia or Argentina, where the whole country would have been. Even if Colombia beats Mexico out of the World Cup or Argentina, they'll still respect it, and they're like, the Argentinos are like douchebags sometimes. They'll make fun of it, but at least the whole country still. I mean, they make light of it, and they like even joke about to Papi, or I think I saw a headline like that once. But at least the whole country cares about it. They're talking about it. In the U.S., it's the second or third. It's like the second or third priority for a lot of Americans, and it sucked to lose to a country where the people didn't even like have the passion for the team. And I remember I had an internship, because this is when we were in college, and I had an internship at the time at a company. And then the next day I walked in and I was really depressed. I was just so fucking sad. You get so sad, man. You don't even feel
Me duele el alma.
Exactly.
Perdió mi México lindo y querido.
So I go to work, and one of the guys there, one of the American guys, he's like, oh, the U.S. beat Mexico. And then he said, there's going to be a lot of unmowed lawns today.
Oh
And I was
my
like,
God.
holy shit, dude. Not only is he like,
Oh my
not
God.
only like, had he gone in there and he would have been like, oh man, amazing, we beat Mexico and now we're gonna advance to. I would have been like, oh, crap, he beat us. Okay, you know what?
That's
yeah,
douchey. That's not
at
classy.
least, yeah, but at least the guy cares and like he's invested in the team. But that's why it really hurt, because we lost to a team where the people didn't even like respect the game enough to.
Well, a lot of the majority in the country.
Yeah, where it felt like that. And I mean, look, I come from a working class community where like my relatives are construction workers, landscapers. So he was making fun of me at a personal level. I mean, look.
No, but listen, but I think that that experience, because then let me put on my U.S. team hat now. That was the best American team that has played, at least since I've been watching the American League. So they were so good, and it's funny because all of our, at least the conversations so far, are tied to Alemania. So I don't know what this means about Alemania, because we talk about Alemania, how we tied against Alemania, and we felt that was a critical step. I think now Mexico is getting ready to face Alemania, and I think this is where a lot of this conversation comes into play. But to say that the U.S. was so good that they should have beat that game, they should have beat Germany in that game, and somehow the Germans still passed. And part of it, there were some controversial calls, but the U.S. should have beat the Germany team. So imagine that if your soccer team was so good that you're about to be one of the constant measures of your soccer ability, and then all of a sudden, boom! But so you lost. That Mexico team lost against probably the best, best U.S. soccer team in a generation.
Yeah, and I think that's I agree with you on that, because that's the year that same U.S. team beat Portugal in the qualifying round.
That's right.
And it was what was his name? Not Donovan, the other guy, the midfielder or the forward. What's his name? He had that amazing header against like the
was it Dempsey?
Not Dempsey. What's his other name? The lean, tall guy, white guy. Bradley? No, it's you just said that. No, it's not Bradley. What's the other guy?
Hey, let's look it up.
I forget his name. So it was a cross in from the corner. And he had in a beautiful header, and I remember that play so much because as he headed the ball, when he landed, he like kept spinning, and it looked really cool. So anyway, they had a pretty good team, and by the way, I hated London Donovan, not because look, you gotta respect skill, right?
Yeah.
So that was a good team, and the fact that I hated him so much is not, I don't hate him as a person, I just hated him because he was such a tough player to play against, because they knew how to get into the Mexicans' mind mentally, how to like beat them, because I remember how they came out. So no, I don't have a problem with the U.S. team. I agree with you. They were a pretty good team.
Yeah.
I had a problem with like the fact that the lack of fan base there, because
so that hurts.
Yeah, because I felt like, man, like they shouldn't. Part of me, what he was even saying at the time, is like, they shouldn't even allow teams to go to the World Cup if at least half of the country is not like hardcore fans.
Yeah.
Because you want to lose to aficionados like in Argentina or Brazil or like Europe and the English or the Germans that they love the sport.
But that's sort of the sense of connection that people feel. And I think, going back to the conversation, I think in some ways when you are coming in Colombia and other parts of the world, like, you're used to dealing with disappointment, right? And it's funny because in Colombia we have a dicho, and I think this applies to other teams in Latin America, is juegan como nunca y pierden como siempre.
Yeah, Mexicans always say that too.
They play amazingly and they lose as always. So in some ways there's that mentality like, oh, you know what? Like, we made it. Well, we still have a lot of work to do. But then really the thing is that soccer and any sport does is, in this particular case, soccer, what it's doing to the Latin American countries is helping them build a championship mentality. So being able to respond productively to loss. Okay, we lost. Now let's double our efforts. Let's work harder. Let's invest in our kids. Let's make sure that when we get to the World Cup, we are physically, mentally, and emotionally ready to play. And I think that's why Brazil, after getting humiliated in their home, a World Cup that they should have won back in 2014 and losing 0, by 7 goals. That was a lot.
That was a beat.
That was a lot.
Beatdown.
So they're motivated and inspired now to, you know what? They need to win that World Cup, and anything less would not be sufficient. But that's the thing. So the country, they're their warriors, and every 4 years, that's what happens. The world sends their best warriors to win and bring honor to the team. So it's sort of the Hunger Games of the world is what the World Cup represents.
With Mexico, it feels like they've gotten better, but we still have so much to go, and part of it is probably the politics of Mexico, the politics of how players are able to rise through the ranks, and maybe we were talking about this before, that maybe the propaganda itself, because the industry has an interest in portraying Mexico to be a great team because they want to sell merchandise, they want to get more viewers to watch the games, to sell more merchandise, to sell more beer and so forth. But maybe this backfires because maybe the people start believing the propaganda, and then the players themselves start believing that, where they feel like they're great, but in reality they have to be a little more humble and realize that they have to work a little harder. They were humiliated by Chile last year at the Copa America, remember?
Yeah.
No, was it last year? It was, I believe, 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah, 7-0. And then last year they lost to Germany's B team 4-0.
And that's the thing, the Chilean team is out of the World Cup
And they didn't even make it. Yeah,
and they are probably the best Chile soccer team in a few decades. And actually, when they lost La Copa Intercampeones against Germany, they only lost by 1 goal, and it was a mistake by one of the defenders. But again, they were able to keep the reigning champion. And they could have beat them if they would not have made a mistake, or they would have been able to score all the chances that they had.
So you were talking about last year's Copa America?
No, this is all the different. So when CONCACAF wins,
You
the
mean
winner
Confederaciones?
the Confederaciones, yeah.
Okay.
The Confederations Cup.
But Germany didn't field their best team.
They did not, and that sort of shows the depth that they have. And those kids did not miss a beat, and this goes back to sort of the formation. Like the reason that Germany, Brazil, so many other countries have an amazing national soccer team is because they invest in the youth, and that's what the U.S. lacks right now. In order to play soccer in the United States, you have to have money, and I was a kid who got scholarship money basically to play for an Olympic development team, or sort of the top level that you can get. And yes, I mean the players in that category, they're so good, but a lot of them also are just good because they've had the resources and the ability to do that. But then when there's a kid, and I wasn't the best in my generation, but some of the great kids that play with me and then against me and who made it to that level, so that who played at the highest division within the state, they were really good, but they had the added intimate knowledge of the game and how you basically play the game, how you build momentum, how you coach, you talk to your teammates and all that stuff. So there's this formula on how you are able to develop your soccer team, and the U.S. is not doing that yet. So hopefully the fact that they didn't make it around this year, there's going to be a new president coming in for the United States Soccer Federation. So we see what kind of changes they'll be able to implement. But the U.S. has to continue to develop all of its soccer talent, and there's so many kids here in California and across the country, Texas, so many places where you have quality soccer players. A lot of those players are Latinos, but unfortunately they're lost. They don't make it to the funnel of
and then
the US soccer.
The club is not the home league is not as strong as other countries, and you have a lot of other sports competing for that same talent. Countries like Germany, remember, I think Germany, I was reading an article that after the 2002 Euros, the Euro Cup, where they were humiliated. I don't think they even made it out of the group stage. They implemented a countrywide policy where they started investing in the development of kids throughout the country. They widened the net. and they try to increase the talent pool. And so 2002, now we're in 2018. That's 16 years later.
That's when those players have come of age.
These are the kids now, the kids that they invested in. And look, any country, if you develop the talent, you're gonna find good players. And the Germans are just being very systematic about it. It seems that they're just saying, okay, well, let's widen the pool, let's get more talent, and let's field a great team. And I wish that other countries, I think Germany, they have a stronger economy. It's like they have that possibility. Like countries like Mexico, it's a little harder to do that because you have still a lot of people that live in rural areas where there might be kids that are amazing, but it's going to be hard for them to be discovered. You really have to live in the cities, and maybe you even have to be connected already to somehow, or be exceptionally amazing to get discovered. And that doesn't happen, which is, it's unfortunate.
Well, it happens in terms, but then there's sort of city, departmental, and then club teams in Colombia and Mexico and all that. Those are the ways that that young
they're not
Mexican players get discovered.
But the net's not wide enough because Mexico has over 1 million.
It's not wide enough, but it's wider than in the U.S.
It is, and it's wider than like a country like Honduras or Costa Rica that has a very small population. Mm-hmm. Mexico, but just by numbers alone, should be a lot better.
Same thing with the U.S.
Right, same thing with the U.S. But you have to not only widen the net to get more talent, but you have to develop the domestic league as well. So anyway, let's bring it back to this World Cup. Colombia is fielding a pretty strong team. Mm-hmm. Mexico just played 3 games. They only scored once. They lost yesterday 2-0. I'm always cautiously optimistic with Mexico. My heart's been broken too many times, so now I'm not as willing to invest myself emotionally as I used to be. I'm a little more guarded.
That's good. That's a good investment strategy there.
I always explain my relationship with Mexico as a type of like abusive relationship where
it is
like nothing good comes of it, yet you stay in it, but hoping that one day there won't be any more trauma. But again, this year they have a good team. I don't know, they might put up a good game against Germany depending on how the players are able to play that specific game. I still think they have a good chance of advancing, but just in general, like I didn't see.
Yeah, because you have Sweden and South Korea, so I think
Sweden might be tough.
Sweden is tough, but they could be tough. But I think South Korea too. I think the South Koreans are the type. They're also investing in their soccer, so they're send a lot of their kids to play tournaments against Brazilians and all those things. So they are now looking to and are investing in their team. So South Korea is one of those teams that you don't know, because they're building the talent, and little by little, there's a few Koreans in the Premier League now, so you can now see their presence. And in some ways, that's when your team has made it around soccer, is when you start seeing more and more of your players from your country playing in international leagues. So, it could be a surprise. But, I mean, again, if you get to the World Cup, there's a lot of competition that you've done. And I think similar to what Costa Rica did in the last World Cup, right? They just have the right talent. And I think anybody who has played soccer or anybody who has played any tournament type of format, depending on how much time you spend together and play together, and then depending on your mentality coming in, that may define but also more importantly, like what kind of mentality, what kind of attitude can you keep in that short amount of period of time where you're playing those 3 games? Yeah,
but it's also, some of it is the luck of the draw as well, because you might end up facing a really difficult team in the round of 16 versus a somewhat okay team. Because look, Costa Rica is a good team. I think that on any given day they can either beat Mexico or tie with them, but it's an equal.
Keylor Navas, he is playing amazingly for Real Madrid.
But the team as a whole, though, I still think that
you need enough players to lift the team.
I still don't think that they would be able to, they played 10 times, maybe like a Germany would beat them 8 or 9 times.
So they have Brazil, Switzerland, and Serbia. Costa Rica does in their team.
So to finish up on what I was saying about Costa Rica, I like the Costa Rican team. I usually cheer for them if if they're not playing Mexico, or especially in the World Cup, because I cheer for the CONCACAF teams.
Mm-hmm.
But 4 years ago, they had a somewhat easy match. I think it was Greece that they had in the round of 16, which allowed them to go to the round of 8, which is great. But sometimes it's the luck of the draw, because had it been a Germany
because
or
Colombia won that group, so
Mm-hmm.
Greece was number 2.
Yeah, and so, but like even if Mexico advances here, because I don't think they would advance in first. It looks like Germany's going to advance first. It looks like they're going to face Brazil in the next round. And
yeah, that's tough. You don't want that.
You know what? What surprised me a lot 4 years ago when I went to Brazil, I had that.
Oh,
chance.
that's right. So you have. I mean, tell us from your perspective, like being in a World Cup in a country that loves. And then you've been to a couple, right?
Well, I went to the one in Germany too, but
Oh man. So tell us.
well,
For all of us who have not had the chance to have the World Cup experience yet, tell us a little bit about how it feels.
but let me give you some background first.
All right.
I just want to go there sometimes to the country that's hosting it. I just think that in itself is a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I've been fortunate enough that I've had the resources to travel now that I'm older to go to these places. But we never went to any games, which some people might think that like, well, bro, why are you going to the World Cup to the country if you're not even going to go to the games? And I'm like, look, it's cool to go to the games and watch them, but to me, I love just being
in the country,
the country itself, in the atmosphere. And Germany was amazing because they, in a lot of places in the plazas, they would bring out projectors and like a ton of people would gather, just drink and watch the games.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing in Brazil. We were there
accessible.
in Copacabana in Rio. We were there when Mexico played Brazil, and on the beach they had the huge projectors and they were showing the game, and it was a ton of people at the beach.
That's the thing, that when you go to a World Cup, like there's gonna be amazing soccer that you can watch, that you can see for free, that you're gonna connect with people
And no matter where you watch it, it's great because places get packed. And
it's fun.
And it's a lot of fun because everyone is wearing their jerseys, and it's not like, honestly, it's a lot of love. And this is what surprised me, that you might have rivalries, but the people themselves, I think they appreciate it, having the people from the other countries. Maybe there's some rivalries where like the people would actually fight each other because of how tense the rivalry is, but at least like, look, we were wearing the Mexico jersey and we got nothing but love, even from Brazilians. And especially that day, Mexico and Brazil tied, and that's the day that what's his name?
Neymar?
No, the goalkeeper Ochoa. That's the day that Ochoa put on a great performance against the Brazil team. So everybody was like just going crazy about him, made like the wall Ochoa.
You always had to find
and that day. So we watched the game at Rio in Copacabana.
Man,
out on the beach, and we were drinking, and there was a lot of people, and then everybody partied that night, and we went to like 3 or 4 different bars. And every single person at the bars was wearing their jerseys. Because it's like it's a whole party.
You gotta be proud. Right? You gotta be proud. Like you go into this place like, oh damn, like I'm gonna be the only Mexico fan. Well, no, you weren't, right? There were other Mexicans, but then the soccer fans, they give you love because the thing is like you build community. That's the thing about soccer. Like even when I came to the U.S., like you go to pick up soccer, like in my junior high and things like you don't have to speak the same language to play soccer. You understand. So there's such a even when you're a quiet kid, you can just go and you probably don't know what you each are saying, but you have that common understanding of soccer. So that's what's so special about it. And when you're a fan, you're happy that your team won, and you also understand how shitty it feels when you lost, and then you realize, you know what, we're here, we're having a good time. Let's just party together. And like
I remember, and so there were a lot of people from Mexico, from the U.S., Mexican Americans or Mexicanos from Mexico. There was also people from Nigeria, Colombians. There were a lot of Chilenos and people from Costa Rica. And so here's something that stuck with me, man. The Chileno, the fans, those guys. Like, you want to be around Chilean fans. Those guys are passionate.
Everything.
They love
it's life.
They love that. I remember we met a few of them, and they were telling us the stories of everything that they had to go through just to get to Brazil. Because a lot of them they just drove there, but it takes a while to get there.
It is.
And these guys were crazy, sleeping in their cars, doing like multiple days just to get there. And they had a lot of. I think the Chileno fan, at least the ones that I met, they seem to like have a lot of respect for like Mexico, for the Mexican fans, and we had a great time with them. This is one thing that shocked me that I was ignorant of, that I didn't know. People from Costa Rica don't think very highly, or don't hold the Mexican team very highly. They don't like I don't. So let me be careful with my words, but I don't think they like the way that Mexicans treat other teams in CONCACAF.
So bully. You guys are the bully.
So they have so when we were talking to them, they were like, "Oh yeah, we don't like the Mexican team. Like they're so arrogant.
You guys are the New England Patriots of
something
soccer."
like that. Yeah, and I was like, "Wait." So I was talking to him, and I never realized it because as a Mexican, we never really even like worry so much about Costa Rica, because we understand they're okay, but we always think we can beat them.
In South America, that's why we make fun of you guys, because like you guys only have to beat the U.S. Like, please, you guys are gonna be better. No way. We have to play against Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Ecuador, those things, you guys. So that's why, and I respect the Mexican soccer team. I think they have amazing players, but coming from La Conmebol, where you have all of these, where you have to you got to be at your game, and you're playing with the best, and then some of the best players in the world come from that part of the world. But that, so like, it's like respecting the talent that you have, because Mexicans do have a lot of great players in other leagues, in the Colombian leagues, but actually a lot of Latin America. The irony is that a lot of people from South America sometimes go to Mexico to continue their career, and then that's how they get discovered by some of the European teams and other places, or they go to the Argentinian league or Brazilian league.
But I do think that, at least like speaking of Mexico and its ability to compete at a high level with the South American teams, the Copa America is really fun because of that, because we know that we're going to get a chance to play all of these teams. And Mexico has, historically, they've done well. They've never won it. They've gotten to the finals twice.
They have never won it?
No, they've never won it. They got, I think the first time they were invited back in the 90s, they got to the final and they lost to Argentina. And then there was a one in Colombia where we lost to Colombia in the final.
Mm-hmm.
But Mexico usually put up a good showing.
Yeah.
So Mexico's team is pretty good, and I'm not hating. I don't hate on the Mexico team. Like the way I see it is, I'm a harsh critic because I expect more from them, and I know that it can be a better team. I wish that it was, given the potential that it has.
Yeah.
But yeah, the road to the World Cup is a lot simpler for Mexico. So it surprised me that this is where the propaganda comes in, though, and this is why the ticos maybe don't like the Mexican mentality as much, because a lot of Mexicans let the propaganda get to their head.
Yeah.
You have Univision and you have all of these other outlets trying to tell you that Mexico is a great team, and trying to put them up there with Argentina and making it seem like it's a good team. And then the people buy into that, the players buy into that as well, and then we act like it. You go watch a video on YouTube about Mexico playing in some World Cup, maybe the last World Cup when we lost to Holland. And you're just gonna hear maybe a lot of excuses. You're gonna hear a lot of negativity, and a lot of the videos. And then you're gonna see the Mexicans. And these are young kids, so you shouldn't take them too seriously. But a lot of them are gonna start making fun of, like, oh well, at least we have a better team than you, and it's just very condescending. So I can understand why some people from Costa Rica wouldn't like the team from Mexico. For my part, I've always liked Costa Rica, and so I always cheer for them if they're not playing for Mexico. I think that Mexicans need to be a little more level-headed when it comes to the reality of like where the team is, and try to push for that team to be better. I would love it if Mexico could compete against like South American teams to get into the World Cup, because maybe we wouldn't get there as often, but when we would get there, we would have a way better team. On that same subject, the one team that has lost the most World Cup matches of all the teams?
No, I don't know.
It's Mexico.
Oh, man.
Because we go to every single World Cup. And we always go deep.
And it's funny.
We always lose like in the round of 16 or round of 8.
Because apparently, just this morning, I was listening to this Radio Ambulante story on a match between Brazil and Chile. But just a reminder that Brazil has actually been the team that's gone to the World Cup every year too. So it's just that...
That's a pretty good streak.
Yes, and
They've
I
always
think,
made it.
and the thing is, and there's another good movie, well, at least a movie that I like that talks about Pelé, right, and how transformative Pelé was, because in some ways he sort of helped break the racial barrier in national and international soccer, and helping the Brazilians generate that identity that they have.
Mhm.
They're like, they don't try to play European because you guys are not European. Like,
Right.
play with that flavor, play
Play
with
your own
that.
game.
So, and when you see a Brazilian play, I mean, it's amazing. Like, they're so fast, so quick, so strong. A lot of them have that skill, and they're amazing players. At least, and it's a very
Well,
high intensity soccer that they tend to play very well.
yeah, but I also think that the rest of the world has caught up to some extent. A lot you do see other teams that try to adopt somewhat that type of style, because even the Germans don't play traditional European ball anymore. They
Yeah,
play
but
a
they're more
lot of-
tactical. They're definitely more. They're more disciplined.
But
they
they
like.
so that article that I was reading, the Germans made a an actual change in which they stopped favoring the tall. They stopped favoring a type of body, certain body type, the one that would maybe give you advantage over like the
height,
long
yeah.
ball and the height. They started going more for the mid-range players
Who-
with
more
the physique.
versatile,
Yes,
yeah.
that could be more versatile. That could play more like individualistic, still within a team, but I think, yeah, to your point, they stuck with their identity, and maybe as a result of it, they forced the rest of the world to say, "Hey, these guys are pretty good playing that type of game. We should probably change our tactics a bit, or
Yeah.
even adopt some of that technique. Not the whole thing, but yeah, it forces other teams to change a bit. So yeah, so again, your predictions. How far do you think Colombia is gonna make it in this World Cup?
I think from my perspective, from the Colombian experience, is we want the team to do well initially. So hopefully, basically, our goal, we would be happy if Colombia does as good as they did in the last World Cup in Brazil, where they got to the quarterfinals. So we are aiming for that result, because in some ways it shows that if you get there again, you have built the discipline, the strategy, the consistency, and the team in order to play and to get to that level. If we get to that level, and I think we will. I think and just real quickly, our teams are Poland, Senegal, Japan. Again, these are teams that could surprise, right? They all have a
Yeah.
lot of talent. They have
It's gonna be
various different degrees of experiences and resources and advantages, but for the most part, it's a pretty even team. But Colombia is definitely, in terms of soccer, Colombia is the best team there. So Colombia should win that group easily. So if they do that, that's great, because that gives us more opportunity to rest players, to try new talent, and not to be stressed out going towards the next stage. So I think if we get to the quarterfinals, our goal would be to do better and possibly win, right? We played against Brazil, and I think in that game against Brazil, we had a whole country, a whole nation that was really rooting very much so for the Brazilians to win. And I think Colombia in some ways came very timid, and it wasn't until James got going in the second half, but he got going too late, and the team itself sort of didn't get settled in until later the game. That said, there were some controversial calls in terms of from the ref not calling some things, calling some fouls. So they were playing. The Brazilians were playing dirty, and I think again this goes to the mentality in South America that sometimes you need to win by all means necessary, hasta dando pata, right? So you
That was a dirty play on Neymar, though, man. You gotta admit that.
I remember seeing that play, and I disagree with you.
He put his knee right on his back.
But I think it's like it was incidental though.
It's a big dude, man, and Neymar's a small guy.
Yeah, but that's the thing. So I think, and if you play the game, I think you never play intentionally to hurt a player, but you play to check him. And I think he tried to check Neymar, and maybe just the way that the impact happened with the knee and all that stuff, they had that impact. But I don't think that was the intent that he was going for.
Yeah.
But they were hacking on James, like they were on James pretty. So that's one of the reasons that he didn't get into the game as much.
It's a very physical sport. I understand that. Just it seemed like that play was at least like Neymar didn't even see it coming. I felt bad not only because he not only checked him but he actually injured him, which is unfortunate. So when you
kind of what happened with like the last championship, the UEFA Champions game. I mean, Jorge Ramos he took down Salah. I think it maybe he pulled him down not with the intent to hurt him, but he was like, I need to keep him boxed in so he doesn't beat me and doesn't get up, and so I'm gonna hold on to his hand so he goes down with me. And then unfortunately the way that Salah landed, he hurt his shoulder.
Yeah,
and and maybe he didn't mean to do it, but it was a result. So that sometimes unfortunately doesn't get.
I mean, to be
hard to check.
To be fair, I think you do have to. We do have to like realize that again, it's a very physical sport. That's why if the ref lets the players start playing like that, the game will get out of hand, and you run the risk of injuring somebody like this Colombian guy injured Neymar, which was unfortunate because then Neymar wasn't in the final, and that's part of the reason. I mean,
that was a big psychological blow.
And then they lost a defender too, so they didn't have two other stellar stars. Yeah, they still lost 7-0, and I don't think the Brazilians are the type that are gonna look for excuses. I hope not, because they have a lot of depth. But they didn't have their superstar. They didn't have Neymar, and they didn't have the I forget what the name of the defender was. A pretty good defender that they lost. But that was stupid. They lost him because he got 2 yellow cards. Anyway, though, so I think we would wrap it up. The discussion. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, thank you for this opportunity.
Looking forward to it. I think Mexico is. Anything below the round of 16 is going to be considered a disappointment for Mexico because they haven't made it past the round of 16 since the World Cup was hosted in Mexico, which there's always some favoritism that comes into play. But for Mexico, if they don't make it to the round of 8, then it's a disappointment. And I don't. It sounded to me like the way you were describing it that Colombians are pretty graceful at accepting defeat. The Mexicans are not. So I'm really hoping that we make it to like the round of 8. Otherwise, devastation all across the board. Just people getting drunk, and I don't want to overgeneralize. This is just me and like the group of Mexicans that I know, but that's what they're gonna do.
Well, the beautiful thing is like, you feel down like that. It does impact you, but then you have to dust yourself off and get up.
Bro,
you gotta be like Shakira and llegó el momento, and then you build towards the future, and you say, you know what? In 4 years, we get a chance to do it all over again.
I got one last thing to say. No fue penal. No fue penal. All right. Thanks a lot for coming.